They said Christmas wouldn't be the same without me. My daughter-in-law put it in a text, one of those long ones she sends when she wants something to feel official. "We want you here, Nora. The kids keep asking about Grandma. It just wouldn't feel right without you at the table." I read it 3 times, standing in my kitchen in Tucson with my reading glasses still halfway down my nose. My son hadn't called himself, he never does anymore. But the text had his fingerprints all over it. The part about the kids asking, the part about the table. He knew what would work on me. I told myself I wasn't going to cry about it either way. I just stood there, looking out at the backyard where my late husband Roy's old citrus tree was dropping another round of oranges. Nobody was going to pick. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I started planning the week after Thanksgiving. That's the kind of woman I've always been, the kind who shows up prepared, who brings the right things, who doesn't come empty-handed. I made a list. 2 sweaters for my grandsons, Caleb and Jonah. A silk scarf for my daughter-in-law, Patricia. A coffee table book about national parks for my son, Dennis. I knew he'd grown up wanting to see Yellowstone. I thought maybe if I gave him the book he'd remember that. Maybe he'd call to talk about it. I spent more than I should have. But what is money for, at 68, if not for the people you love? I booked a flight to Portland the 2nd week of December. Non-stop out of Tucson, which cost more, but my knees don't forgive me for long layovers anymore. I packed 5 days before I needed to. My suitcase sat in the hallway like a patient dog waiting. The night before my flight, I couldn't sleep. Not from nerves, exactly. From something else. Hope, I think. The specific kind of hope that feels embarrassing when you're old enough to know better. The last time I'd seen Dennis in person was 14 months before. He'd come through Tucson on a work trip, stayed exactly 1 night, ate dinner with me, and spent most of it on his phone. Patricia hadn't come. The boys hadn't come. I made pot roast, the one Dennis used to request for his birthday every year. He ate half a plate and asked if I had any antacids. But this was Christmas, and they had asked. My flight left at 7 in the morning. I was at the airport by 5, the way Rory always insisted, because Rory believed that if you weren't early, you were already late. I bought a small coffee and a blueberry muffin I didn't finish. I sat near the gate and watched the sky outside the terminal windows go from black to gray to a thin, watery pink. I thought about the boys. Caleb was 11 now, Jonah 9. I hadn't seen them since the summer before last, when Dennis and Patricia brought them through for 3 days on a road trip to Sedona. Jonah had hugged me at the door like he meant it. Caleb was at that age where he didn't know what to do with affection anymore, but he'd sat beside me at dinner and told me about a book he was reading. Something about a boy and a wolf. I'd ordered the next 2 books in the series for him the following week, mailed them priority. He never mentioned them when we talked after that. I never asked. I boarded on time. I found my seat by the window. I'd paid extra for it. And watched the desert spread out below as we lifted. The saguaros looked like small dark crosses from that height. I watched until they disappeared into the clouds. We landed in Portland just before 10. The terminal smelled like coffee and pine, the way airports do in December in the Pacific Northwest. I checked my phone. No message from Dennis saying we're here. Look for the silver Subaru. No message from Patricia, nothing. I told myself they were probably just running a few minutes late. Portland traffic, the holidays, any number of things. I got my bag from baggage claim, rolled it to the arrivals exit, stood outside under the concrete overhang where the cold came in sideways off the mountains and found the spaces in my coat that my coat couldn't quite cover. I waited 45 minutes. I know because I check my phone every few minutes the way you do when you're trying not to look like you're doing it. I called Dennis. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. "Hey, you reached Dennis. Leave me something." I left him something. I told him I landed, told him I was outside door 6, told him I'd wait right there. I kept my voice light, the way mothers learn to keep their voices light. I called Patricia, same result. 4 rings. Voicemail. I didn't leave a second message. I watched cars pull up and pull away. I watched a young man run out through the automatic doors and throw his arms around a woman who laughed and pressed her face into his neck. I watched an older couple load suitcases into the back of a minivan, while 2 small girls climbed over each other in the back seat. I watched a taxi driver hold a sign with someone else's name on it. At some point, I sat down on a concrete bench. My lower back had been bothering me for weeks. The cold wasn't helping. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it so fast I nearly dropped it. It was a notification from my photo app. A memory from 3 years ago. Roy and me at the Grand Canyon, squinting into the sun. I looked at the photo for a long moment. Roy's arm around my shoulders. Both of us smiling like we had all the time in the world. Then, almost without meaning to, I opened Dennis's Instagram. He didn't post often, but Patricia did. I found her account the way you find things you probably shouldn't look for. The most recent post was from 2 hours ago. It was a photo of their living room. The Christmas tree lit up in the corner. Dennis and Patricia on the couch with their arms around each other. Caleb and Jonah draped across them like puppies. A fire in the fireplace. 4 stockings on the mantel. Mugs of something steaming. The caption said, "Cozy Christmas Eve with our whole world. There's nowhere else we'd rather be." I counted the stockings. 4. I sat with that for a while. The cold working through my coat, the cars coming and going, someone's cart with a squeaky wheel rolling past. There was no 5th stocking, no chair set aside, no space in that photo for me at all. I stood up. I picked up my suitcase. I walked back inside. I didn't have a plan. That's the honest truth. I stood in the arrivals hall for several minutes just watching the automatic doors open and close like the building was breathing. A family rushed past me pulling 3 carts piled with luggage. A little girl in a red coat was crying about something. A man in a Santa hat was handing out candy canes near the information desk. I thought I could call a cab to Dennis's house. Show up. Make them deal with me in person. I thought I could book a flight home tonight. I did neither. Instead, I walked to the rental car counter because Roy always said that a woman should know how to handle herself. And handling myself, it turned out, meant not standing still. The young man at the counter had a name tag that said Kevin and the particular patience of someone working a holiday shift for time and a half. He didn't ask why I was renting a car when I'd clearly just arrived. He just found me something sensible, a silver Camry with seat warmers, and slid the keys across the counter. I drove out of the airport without any idea where I was going. Portland in December is gray and wet and oddly beautiful. The streets were quiet. Most people were already home. I passed neighborhoods full of lit windows, houses glowing from the inside out. I turned the seat warmer on high and let the radio run. An old Patsy Cline song came on. Roy used to hum along to Patsy Cline in the car. I let it play. About 2 miles from the airport, I saw a diner, the kind with neon signs and a fobbed-up front window. A handwritten chalkboard sign out front said, hot soup, hot, P. Open Christmas Eve till 9. I pulled in. Inside, it was warm the way only old diners are warm. A deep, settled heat that comes from decades of cooking and people and not enough ventilation. Red vinyl booths, laminated menus, a counter with swiveling stools. A small TV in the corner showed a football pregame with the volume off. Someone had strung silver tinsel along the edge of the counter and it caught the light in a way that was almost pretty. There were maybe 8 people inside, a young couple sharing a plate of fries. 2 men at the counter who looked like they might work at the airport. A grandmother-aged woman in the corner booth eating soup alone with a library book propped against the sugar dispenser. I noted that she looked comfortable, like she'd chosen this. A waitress came to my table. Her name tag said Ruthie. She had silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the kind of unhurried manner that means either nothing rattles her or everything already has. "Merry Christmas, hon," she said. "What can I get you? What kind of soup?" I asked. "Chicken and wild rice. Made fresh this morning." "That," I said, "and whatever pie you have. Apple or cherry?" "Apple, Roy's favorite." I don't know why I said it. "With coffee, please." She nodded and left without writing anything down, which I've always appreciated in a waitress. I sat there while I waited and I let myself feel what I'd been holding at the airport. Not the grief of the specific thing, the photo, the stockings, but the older, larger grief underneath it. The one that had been building for years without my full permission. I thought about Dennis at 7 years old, running down the hallway on Christmas morning in footy pajamas, so fast he slid into the wall. I thought about the sound he made, half crash, half laugh. I thought about how Roy had scooped him up and tickled him until Dennis couldn't breathe for giggling. I thought about the Christmas 3 years ago, the first one after Roy died, when Dennis had called on the 27th to say they were sorry to have missed me. But the drive from Portland to Tucson was just too much with the boys. I had a turkey in the oven. I had gifts wrapped. I had a stocking on the mantel with his name on it, the same felt one I'd made in 1982. I thought about last Mother's Day. The text had said, "Happy Mother's Day, Mom love, ooh," with a flower emoji. Nothing else. The soup came. It was exactly what soup should be. The pie came after, still warm, with a scoop of vanilla ice cream I hadn't asked for but was grateful for. I ate slowly. I didn't scroll. I watched Ruthie refill the men's coffee at the counter. I watched the young couple share a look that only people new enough to each other still share. I watched the woman in the corner turn a page of her book without looking up. When Ruthie came back, she asked if I wanted the check or another coffee. "Another coffee," I said. "And can I ask you something?" She settled the pot on her hip. "Shoot. Is there a decent motel nearby?" "Nothing fancy. Clean." She tilted her head, not unkindly. "You just get in?" Something like that. She gave me the name of a place about 6 blocks away. The Cedarwood Inn. "It's not fancy," she said, "but the beds are good and they leave you alone." "That's exactly what I need," I said. She poured the coffee without saying anything else. Sometimes the kindest thing a person can do is know when not to ask. The Cedarwood Inn had a wreath on the front door and a small tabletop tree on the check-in counter with blinking lights and a star that leaned sideways. The man behind the desk was older, maybe my age, with a plaid flannel shirt and a careful way of moving, like someone who'd had a bad hip for long enough to accommodate it. He found me a room on the ground floor, room 8, end of the building, facing the parking lot. "Quiet night," he said, sliding the key across the counter. An actual key, not a card. I liked that. "That suits me fine," I said. The room was small and warm and smelled faintly of cedar and artificial pine, probably a plug-in somewhere. The bedspread was hunter green. The lamps had pull chains. On the dresser was a small basket with a few shortbread cookies wrapped in cellophane and a handwritten card that said "Happy Holidays" from the Cedarwood family. I sat on the edge of the bed and took off my shoes. My feet ached. My back ached worse. My chest ached most of all. But that's the one you don't mention to anyone. I turned my phone back over. 3 missed calls from Dennis. 1 from Patricia. A text from Dennis. "Mom, where are you? We went to the airport, but you weren't at arrivals. Are you okay?" I read it 3 times. "We went to the airport, but you weren't at arrivals." I had been at arrivals for 45 minutes. I had called them both. And this was the story they were already building, the one where I was the missing piece, the one where they had shown up and I had not. Not a word about the photo, not a word about the stockings. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. I opened my suitcase, not to unpack, just to find my journal. It's a small thing, brown leather, that I've kept for years. Roy gave me the first one the year we were married. He said, "You have too much inside you to just leave it there." I filled 11 since then. I wrote 1 line. I bought a ticket to be somewhere I was never going to be allowed. I looked at it. Then I added, "I am not a placeholder. I am not a courtesy call. I am not someone's holiday guilt." I wrote until my hand cramped. Not bitter. I want to be clear about that. Grief is not the same as bitterness. And I was grieving, finally. Honestly, maybe for the first time in years. The version of my son I'd been protecting in my mind. The version of our family I'd been maintaining through sheer force of will and enough money to paper over the cracks. Because there was a lot of money. Not enormous wealth. Roy and I were careful people, teachers. We lived within our means, but we had the house, Roy's pension, savings, and the insurance. I'd been quiet about all of it. Helpful. Available. I thought about what I'd sent over the years. The $3,000 when Patricia's car needed a new transmission. The $1,500 for the boys' summer camp. The one where Caleb learned to kayak. I'd seen the photos on Patricia's Instagram before she figured out how to limit my view. These $100 I'd wired when Dennis called, stressed, saying the heating system had gone out right before a cold snap. I never asked for any of it back. Roy would have kept records, but I'd given it the way you give things to family. With open hands, no receipt, no expectation. No expectation. No expectation. That was the part I had to be honest with myself about. I hadn't given without expectation. I'd given hoping it would translate into something. A call, a visit, a fist stocking on the mantle. It never did. In the morning I woke before 6. Old habit. I showered and dressed and sat in the armchair by the window with the weak motel coffee and watched the parking lot brighten. A thin frost had come in overnight. The Camry's windshield was coated with it. The sky was the particular gray of Christmas morning in Oregon, low and soft and not unbeautiful. At 7, my phone buzzed. Dennis again. Mom, please call me. We're worried. Merry Christmas. I didn't call. Instead, I ate one of the shortbread cookies from the basket. It was too sweet and slightly stale, and I finished it anyway. I thought about what I was going to do. I had a return flight booked for the 27th, 3 days away. I could go home today instead. I could stay here in this small, warm room and order food and read and be alone in a way that was chosen rather than assigned. Or I could do the thing I'd been thinking about since somewhere around 2 a.m. I thought about my niece, Claire. My younger sister Vera's daughter. She lived in Seattle, 2.5 hours north, and she called me every few weeks just to talk. The way people used to call each other before talking became an imposition. She called on Thanksgiving to ask how I was doing, and we'd spoken for an hour about nothing in particular. Her garden, my citrus tree, an audiobook we'd both been listening to. At the end she said, "Aunt Nora, if you ever want company, you just say the word." I'd thought about that sentence on the plane. I found her number and sent a text. "Claire, I know it's Christmas morning. I'm in Portland. Long story. Any chance you have room for an old woman for a day or two?" I watched the 3 dots appear almost immediately. Aunt Nora. Yes. Get in the car. I'll have coffee ready. I sat back in the armchair and felt something release in my chest, something I'd been holding maybe for years. I checked out of the Cedarwood Inn. The man in the flannel shirt was there again. Different shirt this time. Same careful movements. He saw my suitcase and said, "Heading somewhere better, I hope." "I think so," I said. I drove north on I-5. The morning was clear now. The frost burned off, the mountains showing themselves to the east. Mount Hood stood pink and enormous against the blue. Roy would have made me pull over so he could photograph it. I thought about pulling over myself, but I kept driving. The road was mine, and the coffee from Claire's was waiting. I called my sister Vera somewhere around Vancouver. She picked up on the second ring. "Merry Christmas, Nora. How's Portland?" "I'm not in Portland anymore," I said. "I'm coming to see Claire." A pause. "What happened?" "I'll tell you the whole thing," I said, "but the short version is that there were 4 stockings on the mantel, Vera. 4. She didn't ask what I meant. She understood immediately, the way sisters do. "Oh, honey, don't make me cry while I'm driving." "Okay," she said. "You drive. I'll be quiet." She stayed on the line all the way to Kelso, just quiet company while I drove. Claire met me at the door of her house in a neighborhood of craftsman bungalows and tall Douglas firs. She was 34, Vera's youngest. With her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw, she was holding 2 mugs. "I made the good stuff," she said, "the Ethiopian blend." I took the mug and she hugged me before I even had my coat off. She held on for a real moment, not the kind of hug you give and release, but the kind where you mean it. "You didn't have to drive all the way up here," she said. "I didn't have anywhere else to be," I said. Which was true, and which she let be true without making it into something sad. She had a Christmas tree with mismatched ornaments and a cat named Gerald who immediately took an interest in my suitcase. She'd made a whole Christmas breakfast, eggs and bacon and biscuits and fruit, even though, she told me, she'd expected to eat cereal alone. Her partner was visiting family on the East Coast. She'd planned a quiet holiday. Now it won't be quiet, she said, sounding genuinely pleased about it. We sat at her kitchen table, and I told her everything while Gerald knocked an ornament off the lower branches of the tree. Claire listened the way good listeners listen, without interrupting, without the particular facial expression that makes you feel like a burden. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Have you called Dennis back?" she asked. "No. Are you going to?" "I thought about it, eventually. But I have some things to figure out first." She nodded. She didn't tell me what to do. She got up and brought the coffee pot back to the table and refilled both our mugs, and that was that. We spent the day quietly. She showed me her garden, the raised bed she'd built herself, dormant now but organized and loved. She'd planted garlic in the fall, little green shoots just barely visible above the soil. She talked about what she planned to grow in spring: tomatoes, pole beans, a cutting garden full of dahlias. I thought about Roy's orange tree. I thought about how I hadn't been tending anything at home, not really. That evening we made pasta together. Claire chopped onions and told me about her job. She was a physical therapist at a children's hospital, a fact I'd known but never fully sat with. She helped small children learn to walk again. I thought about the hands required for that, the patience, the specific kind of love that shows up and keeps showing up. "Your mother raised you right," I said. She laughed. She tried. After dinner, we sat on her couch with Gerald between us and watched an old movie. One of those black and white ones from the 40s where everyone talks too fast and the women are impeccably dressed. At some point, I fell asleep and woke up to the credits and the warm weight of Gerald still wedged against my leg. Claire had put a blanket over me. I sat up slowly, looking around the room. The Christmas tree blinked in the corner. The kitchen light was on, and through the doorway I could see Claire at the table, reading, her coffee gone cold. I thought, this is what I've been starving for, not the full house, not the four-stocking mantle. This, someone who covers you with a blanket when you fall asleep. The next day I called my attorney. Mr. Whitfield had handled our family's legal affairs for 20 years. He was 72, meticulous, and fond of Roy in the particular way that old men are fond of other old men who are no longer around. He answered even though it was the day after Christmas. "Nora," he said, "this is unexpected. I need to talk about the will," I said, "and a few other things." He was quiet for a moment. "How soon?" "As soon as you're back in the office." "January 2nd, he said. "I'll make time." "Thank you, Mr. Kime." "Thank you, Mr. Pye." Whitfield. I hung up and sat for a while looking at my phone. Then I opened my banking app. The automatic transfers I'd set up, the ones that had been running quietly for years like a second household, were all scheduled for the 15th of each month. Dennis's was the largest. I had set it up 3 years ago after Roy died, because Dennis had called and said things were tight, and I hadn't wanted to be the kind of mother who let her child struggle when she had the means to help. I suspended them all. Every one of them. Not from anger. I want to be clear about that. From clarity. From the same place I'd written in my journal 2 nights before. I was not a bank. I was a person. And people deserve to be treated like people, not like utilities. I set the phone down and went to find Claire. She was in the garden with Gerald, who had apparently decided the raised beds were interesting. She looked up when she heard the door. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Getting there," I said. She handed me a pair of garden gloves. "Help me pull this dead stuff then. Gerald keeps trying to eat it." So I did. We worked quietly in the winter garden for an hour, pulling out the spent stalks and the frost-killed annuals, making room for what would come in spring. My hands got cold and my back complained, and I didn't care. It felt like doing something real. On the 27th, I changed my flight home, left 2 days later than planned. Dennis called 4 more times. I let them go. On the 3rd day, I sent him a text. "I'm safe. I'm visiting family. We'll talk in the new year." Not cruel. Not warm. Accurate. Patricia sent a longer message. I could see her composing it, the careful language, the gentle framing. "Nora, I know things didn't go the way any of us hoped. We'd love to start fresh. The boys miss their grandma. A week ago, that sentence would have been enough to undo me. Now I read it twice and felt something clarify. The boys missed our grandma. Not, we miss you. Not, I'm sorry. The boys. Always the boys. As a reason. Never the truth as a reason. I didn't reply. What I did instead was write a letter to Caleb. Not to the family, to Caleb specifically. He would be 12 in February. I told him I'd been thinking about the book he'd mentioned, the one about the boy and the wolf, and I'd like to hear more about it if he wanted to call sometime. I told him his grandfather used to say that the people who read books always have somewhere to go when the world gets too loud. I told him I thought that was true. I gave him my number and told him he could call any time, just him, no occasion needed. I wrote one to Jonah too, different, because Jonah was different. He was the kind of child who needed to know he was seen individually, not as part of a pair. I told him I remembered the hug at the door. I told him that was the kind of boy he was, the kind who didn't hesitate, and that was worth protecting. I mailed them before I left Seattle. Paper letters, stamps, the whole thing. Roy used to say that a handwritten letter is a gift that costs almost nothing and means almost everything. I flew home on the 29th. Tucson spread out below me in the late afternoon, the city running up against the mountains, the desert all around it, the color of pale gold. I've lived there my whole adult life. I know those mountains. I know that specific angle of winter light. My house smelled like the lavender sachets I keep in the linen closet and something warm from the slow cooker I'd left on a timer. A pot of beans that had been doing their quiet work while I was gone. I stood in the kitchen for a while. I looked at Roy's orange tree through the window. 2 oranges still on it, stubborn. I went to my desk and found the folder where I kept financial records. I sat down and went through it page by page. The check copies. The wire transfer confirmations. The mortgage co-signing in 2019 when Dennis and Patricia bought their place in Portland. I'd put my name on that, just in case, just to help. The tuition payments for the boys' private school, which I'd been quietly covering for 2 years. The car. The heating system. The camp. I counted it out, not to punish myself or anyone else, just to see clearly what I had been doing in the dark. It came to more than I'd realized. Not because any single thing was large, but because there had been so many things over so many years, and I had given them all in the same spirit, quietly, without condition, without making it into anything, without ever saying, and in return, I would like to be treated like someone who matters. I didn't write the number down anywhere. I just closed the folder. That was enough. January 2nd was cold and bright in Tucson. I drove downtown to Mr. Prive. Whitfield's office on 6th Avenue, the old Spanish-style building with the orange tree out front. Not citrus, ornamental, the kind that looks beautiful and doesn't produce anything. Roy used to joke that it was everything he disliked in a tree. Mr. Whitfield shook my hand and asked me to sit down. He looked at me the way lawyers look at clients when they already sense the shape of what's coming. "What are we changing?" he asked. "Everything," I said. "But let's start with the will." I told him what I wanted. He listened without expression. When I finished, he made 3 notes on his legal pad and asked a few clarifying questions. The kind that are really just making sure you're certain that you haven't walked in here under some temporary mood. "I'm certain," I said. I wasn't angry when I said it. My voice was even. That surprised me a little, how even it was. I've been certain for a while. It just took a Christmas in Portland to make me act on it. He almost smiled. "Dennis will contest this." "He can try," I said. "That's what lawyers are for." He made a note. "And the trust for Claire, for your niece." "I want it airtight," I said. "Not as punishment. Because she showed up. Because she makes breakfast for someone who needs it. Because she puts a blanket over you while you sleep." I paused. "Because that's what family is." "Mr. Partible." Whitfield took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "Roy would have agreed with you." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "Roy would have done this years ago. Roy had better instincts than I did." Claire called on a Thursday in late January, just to check in. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important and everything real. Her garden, my citrus tree, a documentary we both watched. Gerald's ongoing war with the Christmas cactus. Before she hung up, she said, Aunt Nora, I need you to know what you did coming up that day. It meant a lot to me too. I was going to be alone and then you called and the whole Christmas turned into something else. I needed you, I said. But you also needed me. Yeah, she said. Exactly. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while. The afternoon light was coming through the window at the angle it only comes in January, low and sideways, making everything look a little warmer than it is. Caleb called in February. He called on a Saturday morning, which told me he'd thought about it, chosen a time when he wouldn't be interrupted. His voice was higher than I expected. He was still a boy, still at the age where the voice hasn't decided anything yet. Grandma, he said, I got your letter. I'm glad, I said. The Wolf book, he said. There are actually 5 of them now. The author just released the 5th one. Tell me about it, I said. He did, for 20 minutes. He told me about the whole series, the arc of it, the way the boy and the wolf learned to trust each other, book by book. He was a good explainer, better than most adults I know. I thought about how much was in there, in this boy, that no one in his immediate vicinity seemed to be paying attention to. Caleb, I said when he finished, you should call whenever you want to talk about books. Or anything. A pause. Dad said, you're not coming for Easter. That's right. Another pause. Is it because of Christmas? I thought about how much truth to give an 11-year-old. I decided on most of it. Your dad and I need some time to figure some things out, I said. That's between me and him. It has nothing to do with how much I love you. Okay, he said, in a voice that told me he understood more than either of us was saying. You'll always have my number, I said. I know, he said. We hung up and I sat with the silence of the house and let it be what it was. Not empty, not lonely, but mine. Full of everything I'd put into it over 40 years. The good furniture, the books, the letters in the upstairs drawer, Roy's handwriting on the backs of photographs, the smell of the soap I've used since I was 30, the particular creak of the 3rd stair. Mine. That spring I picked the remaining oranges off Roy's tree. There were 6 of them, improbably, stubbornly still hanging there. I made marmalade, the first batch I'd made in years. It filled 4 jars. I kept 2. I mailed one to Claire with a note that said, from the tree Roy loved, for someone who tends things. The 4th jar I set on the kitchen table and looked out for a while. Then I went out to the backyard and sat in the chair that catches the afternoon light, the one Roy and I used to fight over, because it's the only chair where the shadows fall exactly right. I didn't scroll. I didn't wait for anyone to call. I just sat in my own life, in the sun, and it was enough. If you've ever waited for someone who forgot to come, for a phone call that never landed, for a space at a table that had no room for you, I want you to hear this. You don't have to keep waiting. You can call the person who means it. You can drive toward what's real. You can make the marmalade. Heap the 2 jars for yourself and let the rest go. Your seed is your own. You don't need their permission to sit in it. I used to think that showing up was enough, that if I kept showing up, with the pot roast, with the wrapped gifts, with the flight booked on my own dime, eventually the people I loved would show up too. Not with money or grand gestures, just with presence. With a stocking on the mantle, with someone standing at arrivals holding a sign, or even just standing there, hands in pockets, waiting. They didn't. And I think, if I'm honest with myself, I knew they wouldn't. I just hadn't been ready to know it yet. What happened to me in Portland wasn't a betrayal that came out of nowhere. It was the last page of a story that had been writing itself for years. Every unanswered call, every holiday that got rescheduled without me, every wire transfer I sent without a thank you. Those weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern. And patterns, if you pay attention, always tell you exactly who someone is and what they think of you. I just kept choosing not to read it. There's a kind of courage that looks like patience from the outside. You tell yourself you're being gracious, understanding, generous. But sometimes what you're actually being is afraid. Afraid that if you stop giving, they'll confirm what you already suspect, that the giving was the only reason they kept the door open at all. I was afraid of that confirmation for a long time. Portland gave it to me anyway. 4 stockings, no fifth, and somehow I survived knowing. What I learned, sitting in that diner on Christmas Eve with Ruthie pouring coffee and the tinsel catching the light, is that there's a difference between love and subsidy. I had been subsidizing a relationship for years and calling it love, real love, the kind Claire showed when she texted back immediately, when she made breakfast, when she put a blanket over me while I slept. Doesn't require you to fund it, it just shows up. Because it wants to. Nora, the woman I was before that Christmas, would have called Dennis back, would have smoothed it over, made excuses for the photo, found a way to return in the spring with more gifts and more hope. That woman was not weak. She had survived real loss, Roy's death, years of quiet loneliness, and kept herself upright. But she had confused endurance with wisdom, and that's a costly mistake. The wiser thing, I've come to believe, is this. You cannot force recognition from people who have decided not to see you. You can only decide whether you'll keep standing in their doorway waiting for them to look up. At some point, the dignified thing, the truly strong thing, is to turn around and walk toward the people who are already looking. Caleb called in February about the Wolf books. He talked for 20 minutes, excited and unguarded. And I thought, this is who he is when no one is performing. This is what gets lost when adults are too busy managing their own discomfort to pay attention. I couldn't fix his parents. I couldn't fix Dennis. But I could be the person who picks up when he calls, who writes the letter, who remembers what he said. That's the part of this I want to hold on to. Not the anger, not the audit of every dollar sent and ignored, but the understanding that the capacity to show up for someone is worth more than anything you can wire transfer. And that it's never too late at 68 or 88 to decide who deserves yours. I made marmalade from Roy's oranges. I kept 2 jars. I mailed one to Claire. That's the whole philosophy, right there in 4 jars. Keep what sustains you, give to those who tend things, and don't make preserves for people who leave you standing in the cold.